So our next session today, following on from Ray's first one, which was an absolute belter of a session, I thought. There's a lot of fascinating insights came from that session. So our second session today is on achieving maximum operational efficiency and looking at how service providers can best operate at speed and scale. And all this comes at a time when the industry is facing a lot of restrictions on capital expenditure, and the answer could lie with automation and a shift in strategy towards operating at both speed and scale. But just how automated should a telco strive to be, and what other methods are available to help with operational efficiencies, and what are the implications for service providers? A set of really tough questions there, but thankfully, as co-host for this session, we have Ian Milligan, who is Chief Network Officer at 3 UK. Ian, it's great having you at DSP Leaders. You're looking forward to a robust and challenging discussion?
Definitely, it's a very interesting topic, and I know from my perspective and other kind of MNOs, it's a painful one, and it's one that's really good to actually get under the skin of it and have a good conversation on it.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ian. I think we should introduce our other guests, because we've got 5 other guests with us on this session. If I can start from my far right with Mark. If you could all introduce yourselves, nice and short, name, job title, and company, that'd be great.
Sure. Mark Gilmore. I'm CTO at Connectivity.
Great. Well, it's always good to have one of our regular online summit contributors in person at our events. Good to see you, Mark.
I'm shorter in person.
No issues with bandwidth today?
No, shorter in person.
And next to Mark.
I'm Warren Bayek, Vice President overseeing technology and strategy for the Office of the CTO at Wind River.
And Warren, where did you travel from today to get here?
North Carolina.
North Carolina?
Yes.
Long journey. Good to have you. And next to Warren?
Hey, I'm Alexander Havang. I'm CTO of Sandvine, and I traveled from Malmö, Sweden yesterday. Good
to have you. And it just occurred to me that we used to ask all our first-time guests what their hot beverage of choice was. We used to have are you a tea or coffee person a few years ago? So, Alexander, are you a tea or coffee drinker?
Oh, definitely a cappuccino guy.
Cappuccino guy, right, good to know. We'll make a note of that one. And coming across to my left now, Nastasi.
Thanks, Guy. Nastasi Karaiskos from Rakuten Symphony UK.
It's good to have you here, and this is your first time at DSP Leaders?
Second, actually, Guy. You forgot. I was here last year.
Of course you were. How could I forget that? It's such an impact on me. That's I can't believe it.
Memorable.
Oh, dear me, memory lapse indeed. And next to Nastasi?
It's Ken Ranger. I'm the CEO of BA Communications in the UK.
Now, Ken, this is your first time at DSP Leaders.
It is.
There you go. And you're going to try your hand at the pinball?
Most definitely.
Fantastic. Right, good luck to you. Welcome everyone. So before we get stuck into the actual questions and our discussion, I'd like to invite Ian to give our DSP Leaders address.
Cool. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I think it was a really good first session, and I think the subject that we are going to go into complements that quite a lot, especially the conversation around moving from a telco to a techco. It's a discussion which has been on for a long, long time. It's not just been in the last couple of years. Like within 3, we were talking about 2016, and we tried our hand at it. I think one of the big challenges, and it's the key subject for today, it's reducing your cost base and being efficient. The big issue, obviously, is always with how your OPEX looks at it from a telco perspective. The big drivers are looking at your EBITDA as your measure of success. So having too much OPEX is never going to help you, but that is the constraint we've got. Now, there's been elements of what's been successful, some learnings along the way in the last number of years, but I'd say actually there's been a real shift probably starting from our perspective anyway since about 2020, and that's driven based on necessity or external necessity rather than internal drive for efficiency. So if we talk about, obviously every day was impacted in lots of different ways with COVID, but there's an element of you had to adapt, and an example that we faced within 3 is we talked about for years about doing a certain level of automation for a simple thing like telephony systems for our contact centre. We'd say that take years to do. People need to adapt to a new way of working. We managed to launch and change a telephony system within about 3 days, when previously said it would take a year. And that's then taking that use case and driving it into other aspects of automation, efficiency. has just grown massively, but that's been born out of the need to change rather than looking at an opportunity to be efficient. So it's a bit of a mindset change that we have to go through. Now, again, in the last 18 months, we've seen another challenge, which, again, we're all very familiar with. The big hot topic is always about energy efficiency. There's also the supply chain challenges. There's the cost, due to the cost of living crisis, around the impact to our consumers being able to afford services. So again, the pinch comes on to, from a telco perspective, how do you drive down your costs whilst improving services, whilst being really smart with your CapEx. But I think the reality is, and this is something which everybody has to adapt to, is in the telco environment, it is a perpetual problem to solve. There's always going to be another issue coming up. So how do you structure yourself? How do you work in a way which drives the behaviour to be cost efficient, to drive efficiency with your OpEx, driving the right behaviours to also generate best customer experience and best products out the back of it, which can sometimes be contradictory terms, but that's something which we're looking forward to getting into this panel. So take a bit of a step back around how I kind of see it and how we see it within 3E overall in terms of approach. Is we've learned through the fact is that as the fourth operator within the market, we've got the lowest amount of CapEx investment amongst the other all four. That's forced us to drive a more efficient way of working. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it's not, but we do a lot of kind of trial and error. But the three big areas which I'd say that we focus on is really around driving the efficiency and drive to automation. It's not just somebody who's a really good engineer, that's a critical part of it, but you have to tee up your whole environment to be successful at it. So that's looking at from procurement to operate. And I really like that quote from the question around the zero-sum procurement process. That's the challenge that we've got to try to overcome, and the dreaded relying on outcome-based contracts. So we are trying to look at that in a way of, okay, if you're going to make this successful, how do you make win-win contracts? How do you then look at your design and your architecture to be automatable from the start? How do you have the right skills within your operations to be able to leverage that? And how do you have the right skills to identify the problems to solve? So for us, it has to be an end-to-end procurement to operate. Another big discussion that we've had, and again, it's this point which is in the previous session, was around in-source versus outsource. It's mainly around smart sourcing, and we again went from one side of the pendulum to the other. Very similar to the statement earlier around 80% outsource, 20% in-source. It has to be better than that. We've gone on a journey to actually in-source as well, but it's around the right balance, and it's actually having the right partnerships with the right suppliers in the most effective way so we can all get the best outcome from it. But that is a key part of that with our overall operating model. And I'd say the last part, and it's a big topic around to drive that automation, to drive that skilled, or those right outcomes for our business and for our customers. It's having the right technical knowledge, the right process knowledge, and the right insight to be able to put a full wrap around it, to be absolutely laser focused on where you get your efficiencies. And those overall three angles is how we're trying to tackle the problem, but I'm really keen to hear around from the rest of the discussion today where else we get to. So thanks very much, and looking forward to the panel.
Thank you very much, Ian. Well, whilst Ian makes his way back to the desk, let's have a look at the viewer poll we have for this session, because we have a new poll for every session we are doing this year. So here is the question we are asking for this session, along with the multiple choice answers. Let me stress, they're multiple choice answers, and you can vote for more than one. And the question is, where should DSPs prioritize their investments to achieve maximum efficiency gains? You can see the 5 selections there. It's on the Telecom TV website, so if you're watching online, please do fill it out now. It doesn't take very long, and if you're in the room, get your laptops out or your phones out, and please just vote for what you think are the areas that we need to prioritize our investments in. We will take a look at the state of the voting at the end of this session. Right, we have a number of talking points to get through. First we want to address is, what are we seeing in terms of CapEx and OpEx at the moment, and just how restricted is CapEx, and how much business efficiency is going to have to come from OpEx. Ian, perhaps I could start off with you as being an M&O on the panel, and coming off the back of what you've just been telling us. How much of this business efficiency is going to have to come from OpEx?
I think we're at a stage where a large proportion of it has to, probably for the next 12 to 18 months in building those foundations. From a CapEx perspective, I think everybody's under a summer pinch as your CapEx doesn't get you as far as what it used to, driven by obviously inflation and all the rest of it. So for us, we're trying to look at focusing on actually the right short-term and long-term investment, but the priority is on sweating the asset, and that's not by making short-term decisions, but it's looking at what's the capability within the product suite you've got, how do you rationalize your product suite, but also working with right partners, suppliers, vendors to actually upskill your resources to leverage those products to their full potential as much as you can. So that's kind of how we're looking at it at the moment.
Great, thanks Ian. I'd like to talk to other operators, Ken in a moment, but Mark, different type of operator business, but what's your view on the efficiency gains we need to extract from OpEx?
Well, for us at the moment, we're in the middle of a very CapEx-intensive rollout. But before we even kind of metaphorically put a spade in the ground, actually one of the things we started work on first of all was sorting out the operational automation that needs to go into that to basically maximize that CapEx investment. So we've actually invested, the first part of our rollout program has actually been in sorting out the operational tools, the automation levels, so that we don't have to overinvest in that, because Ian made the point in his kind of keynote at the beginning there, that it's about bringing it in, bringing the right resources, the right component parts together, to be able to go on that full automation journey across the whole of the spectrum. So we're right in the middle of a major CapEx investment and rollout, but actually we're looking to how do we maximize that from our operational tools, from our automation tools, because that then also shows how we scale the business in terms of going back to the earlier panel discussion about the right resources and not necessarily building up this massive operational team or this massive engineering team, but actually have a much more customer-focused, customer-centric team, and automate as many of those processes as we possibly can to get the best out of that necessary CapEx that we're investing right now.
All right, thanks very much, Mark. And Ken, what about you and your business? Are you seeing similar arguments to what we heard from Mark?
Right, so traditionally I looked at the physical layer. So as a neutral host, we looked at to combine different MNOs such as Ian onto one network where it makes sense. Here in London, we're building out a network in the London Tube, so a 160-year-old network, and we're putting 5G service into the arguably the oldest transport network in the world. When we did this in New York City, in the beginning we thought about mechanical engineering and electrical engineering and things like that, like pure civil. What do you do with heat? What do you do with the weight? And along the way, we started seeing some of the telemetry and what you can do with some of that information. So now, yes, we're in the middle of a huge CapEx-intensive build here in London, but at the forefront wasn't just mechanical or electrical. There's also DevOps engineering, the software engineering, and the mentality about how do you solve. Like, there's an answer for like software as part of the development process. It's part of the engineering, and it is amazing what you can do when you have that mindset. So I learned it kind of the hard way, but it's wonderful the talent coming in. And yesterday I was talking to a graduate class coming into our company. And they were asking, what's AI, the role of AI, machine learning. And I almost turned it around on them because they know better than I do. And it's just amazing what we can do.
And this also highlights the synergies between our sessions and the fact that we just had a session on culture and skills and what have you. And it's still very relevant to the OpEx session we've got here. Stasi, can I turn to you because, from a vendor perspective, but you've got a a pedigree in mobile as well behind that company, and it seems to me that OpEx is one of your key business drivers, and reducing that's one of the key things that you focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Rakuten Mobile journey has been well documented, and how automation has been implemented there. And it's a different scenario when you're a greenfield compared to a brownfield, when you have a vast estate of different technologies and vendors to have to deal with. One of the topics that we didn't sort of touch on earlier, which I think was a great discussion, was around some of the energy efficiencies that we can achieve through automation. So not just in terms of people and integrating new people and how we incentivize them to embrace automation. But an example would be something like fault monitoring and fault prevention and detection. Not just sending fewer people out to site, so reducing that carbon footprint, but also the power consumption, because if we've got sort of centralized architecture, cloud-based architecture, we can also reduce the amount of power that we're consuming as well. So I think sometimes the efficiencies often get drawn towards commercial efficiencies or efficiencies around people, but the energy efficiencies and the impact around climate savings through automation are also very important.
Yeah, absolutely right. We do have, for those of you who are staying around tomorrow at DSP, we've got an afternoon devoted to this, and we've got a special session on energy efficiency, which we can pick up that conversation on. For our other panelists, any thoughts from your perspective? Warren, do you want to start?
Yeah, I like the direction that we've taken the automation discussion. Ian started on the keynote, if you will, that automation we often think of it as a day 1, 2, and beyond kind of savings possibility. But the truth is, in this market, especially as we continue down this disaggregation and open solutions, automation has to start way before even the decision to start the deployment. It starts at vendor selection. It starts with, from the previous session, we had a member of the TIP organization here. It starts with companies coming together and automating how we certify solutions together, so that when a provider rolls out a solution, there's a relatively high success rate. We're not learning how to integrate things at deployment time, right? The integration certification, the concept of integration being something we do before we deploy is kind of new to this market, because we haven't had to deal with it. Being disaggregated is new. So I think automation is going to solve a lot of the problems that we're introducing our own set of problems through this disaggregated and open environment. And automation, frankly, is the only way we're going to solve it. We're early on in the journey toward true automation to solve all these problems. But the realization that automation is really, not only will it save on OpEx, it's absolutely essential to even get the services to roll out in any meaningful and high quality way.
Thanks, Ron. And Alexander, thoughts, opening thoughts from you on the role of, or the importance of efficiency in the OpEx budget, and what you're seeing from your telco customers.
Well, I think it's good to start with a question around why. Like, why is automation even a topic, or why is it needed? Well, it's needed because our industry is not super healthy. And in order to remain at the EBITDA levels that we have for just our connectivity services that telco is mostly about, we have to reduce OpEx. And a lot of the OpEx is humans. And we can't be this many. Some operators recently cut 10,000 people off their staff. So automation is really, really important. But I think it's also really, really hard. And when something is really hard, in my experience, it's good to look at the big buckets first. So I'm a little bit scared when people look at automation as a bottoms-up problem. Let's look at technology and how we're going to do it, and all the little pieces that come together to build automation. If you don't have good leadership that looks at, well, why are we doing it? What do we want to achieve? What are the first 3 to 5 things that we want automation to solve? what will that do to our business, and how do we achieve those things first in a pragmatic way, and then sort of go all the way down the chain. How do we do that? What technology do we need to do that? What organization do we need, and what process do we need? Instead of talking about bits and pieces.
So does that resonate with you, Ian, that approach?
It does, and it's a journey which we've started on to different levels of success. But what I would say has been one of the challenges, and it's one of the things that I said at the start, is around how you make it win-win with your vendors, with also the CSPs, is that we're on this constant drive to reduce down our OPEX, be more efficient with our CAPEX, whereas the vendors need CAPEX, they need OPEX, they need costs. And the question then moves more on to how you create beneficial margin for both parties, and that's something which you have the conversations. I think we're not mature enough yet. We still get the same challenges on, and then the easy answer turns to what you've said, Alexander, which is people. And that is, again, keep using the term, it's a zero-sum process, because you need the people, and if you're constantly trying to reduce your headcount, you're not solving the big problems, which is the efficiency of your technology, of your estate, the services you offer. So I think that it's very familiar, based on what everybody's saying, is the challenge.
I think we've moved into our second talking point through a process of natural osmosis here, which is terrific, because I wanted to get on to the role that automation is playing in telco operational efficiencies. At the risk of going into the detail, not looking at the big picture, I'd like to sort of look at where it is best used in the network, and not only where is it best used in the network, but how we can actually estimate and measure the efficiency gains and what we can expect. I mean, there's some kind of like rough ballpark figures we can expect through the implementation of different automation methods. Nastasi, perhaps we could come across to you first, some initial thoughts about that.
So I think we give ourselves a bit of a hard time sometimes in the telecoms industry. We look at, we hear about sexy hyperscalers and, people preferring to join that. But I think there's some great examples of innovation with disruptive technologies that I've seen, for a good few years. Where to start? I think this is a complex question for the business. I mean, first of all, whatever automation project that they're going to undertake, I think for me, what is that exit criteria going to look like? What is the value that we're going to get from it? If it's small, then maybe why would we do it? But I think identifying that first of all. So then understanding, is it the transport layer? Is it the RAN? Where are we going to automate? Maybe where is this, the biggest pain point first of all that would have the biggest impact for the lowest cost and the least disruption is the formula. And often, the operator needs to embrace that cultural change, which is not something that we're used to around automation as service providers. And how we incentivize those developers to continue that automation so that we don't then introduce further manual processes down the line. And I think some of the examples would be from anything from fault monitoring, change management, performance management. Is it in the build? Is it in the planning stage? Is it on the business side where maybe we would look to first introduce that operation, that automation? And then also understanding how do we then enable the developers to be able to write their own automation scripts, develop their own use cases. That's got to be the end goal, so that there's then less reliability on any of the vendors. The service provider wants to be able to do this themselves, do it quickly, to potentially even introduce new automation scripts within minutes.
Yeah. Thanks, Nastasi. Warren, well, maybe you could pick up on your previous answer then, and let's talk about where it can be best used in the network and how we can measure.
I actually wanted to go back to something Alexander said is really important. And why are we automating? That in the end we have to answer that question. And what are we automating? To your point, Sazi, the key, I think, first thing we have to do is in another world as an engineer, when you need to optimize something, the first thing you have to understand is, what do I need to optimize, right? What do I need to automate to get the biggest bang for the buck? As you say, the lowest amount of cost to yield me the biggest benefit. So the first thing service providers have to do is understand their operational model today at a very deep level. They have to understand where are we spending resources, Where am I spending time? Where are my customers being impacted by my lack of automation, by my lack of ability to change things and fix things in real time? So the first thing is really telemetry collection and understanding what to automate. I think a pretty clear place that has risen to the top without even getting very deep is this energy efficiency idea. So the idea of how do I automate energy efficiency and how do I improve energy efficiency should be one of the first things, and it has been one of the first things that we've tackled, frankly, with some of our relationships with providers. You know, how do we work together? I like this concept of co-collaboration I've heard. Mm-hmm. Each of us, as we come to this ecosystem with our own particular expertise, Wind River in the infrastructure space, we understand some things better than anyone else in this space, but we don't know a lot about some other parts of the network. So if we can work together and we can work with service providers, for instance, Wind River has worked with some to show how we can drop operational and energy costs on a server basis at the far edge sites up to 20%. That's something we can do. Now we can put that into the full automation suite of a provider, but then we need other collaborators to come in with a larger view of how do we save even more energy in the system. So working together and creating automation platforms that can play together, because these are mostly brownfield environments we're going into. In our biggest rollout deployment scenario, for instance, at Verizon, they obviously have their own tools in place. So we're not going to come in with an automation solution and replace what they do. We are fitting what we do into their system and allowing them to use the scripts they already have, along with the automation tools that we're providing to improve their efficiencies along the way. That said, one thing we have to be really careful of in this industry, and we can learn from other industries here, is the one thing you don't want to do is simply automate existing terrible manual processes, right? You want to step back and try to understand, what do I really want to accomplish in the end? What's my end desired goal for this entire operational efficiency at scale process? And as much as you can, start with a clean slate and work into that solution rather than just automating existing processes.
Can I just jump in with a challenge, hopefully, is where do you see the benefit of that top-down approach of taking the big problem statements versus creating an environment so that the engineers can just do what they want? Because some of the greatest automation examples that we've achieved within 3 is just having a flexible platform, and an engineer who just wants to solve a problem has ended up saving us a couple of £1 million versus me kicking off an automation project to go solve a problem. So I know there's a bit of both, but how do you see that balance?
If I understand your comment correctly, you're saying state the problem and let smart people solve it. That's how I look at this.
Or create the environment to allow them to go do it.
Yeah. You just create a platform with a problem statement, create a automated DevSecOps solution to allow application developers to do important. And we're going to talk about this at all these sessions. It's a lot of overlap. But create that environment to let developers get excited, right? We talked about how do we get these people excited about, you can actually make automation exciting. Wouldn't that be something? To enable smart developers to come into this space and contribute, their intelligence and their unique approach. Frankly, I don't have the best answer to all these problems. I don't think any of us do. Right? Let's open the platform, let's open these standards, let's open this environment, and let smart people come in and do cool things with it.
Ken, you nodding in agreement?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Ian said. So if I went back to thinking what I was saying earlier about this type of engineering with a software engineer, DevOps person in the room. So Ian saying, how do you solve that problem? So if he or she's there, they understand all of a sudden there's a problem with the network over here. Okay, the use case is that access point isn't behaving the way it should be. How can I solve that? How can software solve that? And that leads to business opportunities as well. So he or she goes through that, understands the script that can cycle that device. While doing that, it's looking at the associations to that device. Someone else understands, well, wait a minute, there's actually a problem in the transport network there. That's why there's congestion. That's why it's cycling very, very fast. The transport authority now has no way of knowing there's an issue with people. They can monitor their trains, not necessarily the passengers. Well, maybe with that association data linked to something else, they can turn their CCTV cameras and see if there's an issue on the platform. So automation leads to a business case, leads to additional revenue in a constrained environment. And again, it's back to the environment you create, because it's extremely hard to have one person in their silo translate what he or she needs over to a software person and put it in a way that he or she can understand, and then have to an output that is actually meaningful. It's that dynamic, having everyone collaborate, and that's where some amazing things happen.
This is a great thread to explore, and I just wonder if we should open it up to the room now, and whether or not we've got any follow-up questions about this particular thread we're exploring from our audience. If there is anybody, I think there's a hand in the center there. I can just about see under the glare.
Hi, Robert Curran from AppLogic Research. On different panels in different contexts, I've heard operators share completely different views about their view of operating cost, from we totally understand our operating costs down to the lowest level of detail, through to I have no idea what my operating cost is actually made up of. I'm interested in, from this panel, a perspective on whether telcos already have a clear enough idea to be able to identify and target areas for automation, or whether some telcos are still at a stage behind that, where they really don't understand what all these people are doing all day long.
Thanks, good question. Ian?
Yeah, so I definitely know where my operating costs are. I think there's a reluctance within, not necessarily the wider business, but probably more so within the more technical groups within my area, the trust to automate away certain activities. So I think there's still a fear factor of that and the consequences of what that means. So we definitely know what the cost is, but I think there's a bit of a building the trust to do it, and I think that's where there's an element of you build a platform and the solutions will come. And that's where we need to try to get to. So my opening position.
Thanks. Mark, have you got any thoughts about the question there, about knowing our costs?
Yes. Yeah, we have a very clear view of where our operating costs are. Actually, it's it goes back to the question of the why. I don't envy my colleagues that are operating in a brownfield environment, that have to automate from an environment of non-automation and do that transformation piece. But equally, I don't think I'm going to get any sympathy in the room for my position being in a greenfield and being able to do that from day one. But it does go back to the point that Warren made about not building manual processes that I then automate from day one, but actually looking at it from the end game. What am I trying to achieve with what I'm doing within my company, within the network, within the services that we're offering? And actually, to that question, we absolutely have to have these automation tools and automated processes within our business model in order to make the business model work. It's not possible to build a pan-European and global network today on the principles and the processes and the business model of the last 20 years. You wouldn't do it, and we're not doing it. You have to adopt and take new strategies. So as a result, for example, when I look at the makeup of our company and I look at the people that we're bringing into that company, there's a heavy portion that is dealing with how do we handle that software development. We're not doing it ourselves. We're not in a position to be able to do that as a software house. We partner, and it's about finding the right partners to work with and creating those win-win opportunities. But I need to have within my team the ability to understand what's going on. I can't abdicate responsibility or abdicate the knowledge on that. I still have to own and control that, but working then with our partners to be able to do that. So a great deal of my resource and my operating costs is, from a human point of view, is related to how do I manage that and that software development piece. The project base is kind of a ring-fenced budget. You know what that looks like, and you know what the scope is and how you're going to deliver on that. But actually being able to manage that then going forward is a real key important part of actually making my business model work as a company.
Thanks very much, Mark, for that. Much appreciated. And we've got another question, I think it's from Neil in the back of the room there.
Hey, thanks. So Neil McRae from Jupiter. I just wonder, it's been very OpEx and cost focused. So I was with two customers just before I left BT. One of them a very large bank with lots of money, which we like, right? And basically, what he said to me is, Neil, if you half your lead time on Ethernet, I'll place twice the amount of business. That's a no-brainer business case, right? It's just like, oh yeah, Ethernet, the easiest product we sell in the industry. For half the lead time, they're going to buy twice as much, and they buy a lot already. Second customer, large parcel organization, lots of branches, lots of locations, lots of outages or issues with. You have all these people with these handsets where they have to scan pictures and sign parcels. Half their challenges is they lose about 30% on not being connected to the network or having some sort of network issue. I said to their CIO, if I reduce that by half, how much is it worth to you? And the answer was like 20, 30 million pounds. We delivered a solution that enabled them to do that, and now they're a customer forever because we really get how they understand, and that's what automation is about. It's how do you engage with a customer to automate what you do for them so that they can be more successful. Any business case, and then any business case starts with that. And let me tell you, you'll bring in a huge number of other benefits because other bits that you need to automate to deliver that will suddenly appear. Ian made a really important point though, which is enable folks just to automate the mundane. But just be careful of the maturity of that because suddenly you get hit with, oh, we need to move from IP MPLS to SRv6. And it's a nightmare because you've kind of hard-coded everything. And I'll leave with another Google quote. How many folks in senior leadership in Google think, hey, we need to automate to reduce OpEx? I doubt that conversation happens all that often because they're thinking about customers. How do we automate to sell more, to deliver more, to add more value? And I'd like for us to pivot our thinking along that line so we can be more competitive with those guys.
Thanks very much, Neil. Appreciate those insights. Any reactions to Neil's piece there?
Yeah, I think to the previous question, again, echo Ian, I know my costs. I know CapEx, I know OpEx, but what I don't know is the opportunity cost of not looking at software a little bit more and what we can do when we automate things. Not to save costs, that's really straightforward. You can work at that, you can get rid of this, you can look at headcount. But when you're budgeting, how do you, in a traditional company, do you go and say, I need 3 more developers? How do you justify that? And I still struggle with it. I can see the value, but to put a business case together, that's the tough one.
Thanks, Ken.
I have a comment on Neil's very smart words. I would say, when you, and I like it, I like that, the growth aspect of it. When you optimize for something, you're always, because this is an optimization problem at the end of the day, you're going to sub-optimize for something else. So when we go more and more into automation, what are we sub-optimizing for? And as spend a lot of my time, at least in my early career, actually writing code, you learn that the heavier you optimize, you lose flexibility. Because you're creating more and more specificity around your problem domain. So I think we have to be careful around where we optimize too much so that we don't lose flexibility. And a good way to balance that is to think about what really matters in the end is the subscriber is happy. So as long as you have that as a philosophical North Star, how do I keep my customers happy? What matters to them? And then you try to optimize around that and try to cut as much cost and fat out of the system as you can. With that North Star, I think you're in a better place. Otherwise, you may optimize your way to a situation that won't be viable years from now.
Good points. Thanks, Alexander. Mark, did you want to come in on
Yeah, I think there's a really important point about focus and focus dilution that can occur, which can then drive you into a position where you jack of all, master of none into that. And I think knowing, going back to Neil's point, knowing and getting really into what your customer base and who is your customer base and focused on that customer base wants and knows, then that allows you then to develop the right sort of processes, the right sort of approaches to be able to deal with them. It goes back to that question about not just automating processes that we've already had, but actually being able to develop the right approach for the customer base that you're facing. And I think that's one of the things that we've noticed, where that focus for us as a company and where our customer base is and who our customer base is, and then also not competing with that customer base, makes it really, really then powerful to be able to develop and co-develop the sort of approaches that allow our customers then to be more successful in their sales opportunities, in their reaching out to the customer, just like in Neil's example of being able to deliver quickly. I think that's a really, really critical point for us as an industry.
Thanks very much, Mark. I just want to move the conversation along because we've got a few more issues we want to discuss. Nastasi, I guess the provocative question is, if this was easy, we'd all have done it by now. Given what we've been talking about the past 30 minutes or so, what are some of the challenges that we still need to overcome, and how do we actually get over these hurdles?
So I'll pick a couple. There's lots that we need to tackle. First one, maybe the cultural change. So first of all, when people are hearing maybe automation and AI, are they thinking, is there a risk to my job? I've been doing this in a certain way for 20 years. So, there's some resistance there often. And I think that's a challenge for us all.
It's well versed when you hear headlines like we've heard
the last couple of weeks, absolutely,
yeah.
Which are trying to link maybe a positive to the technology to a negative of maybe some people potentially being at risk. Then it's incentivizing the people in the right way who are introducing the automation, so that they don't get into a position of thinking, well, it's just quicker if I do this myself manually and then more manual. So how do we continue to incentivize that automation? Is it internally through whatever, point systems, bonuses, whatever it might be? And then there's the second point is the technology. There are so many different automation options available now that we see. And how do we integrate them, and how interoperable are they before we create sort of an even bigger mess that we have to try and manage? Because there's so many different platforms. Does it integrate with the cloud? Does it integrate with my current RAN? Am I going to end up having to manage all of this myself? Is it a mixture of both with other vendors? So I think these are sort of two challenges that I often see and talk about with service providers that they're trying to tackle. But it'd be interesting, Ian, to hear from your perspective as an MNO, some of the challenges.
It's very similar. So I'd say one of the pain points for us is getting a truly open, flexible environment. Hence the question earlier. And the TM Forum guidelines are actually a godsend when it comes to the OSS stack specifically. I think it's made a real difference. We just need a further adoption of it. The reality is that there's so much power of information within the network to be able to understand what works, what doesn't work, but also how to make changes. And linking that into what the customer experiences through telemetry data will enable the right priority use cases, the right automation. But the big challenge is getting access to your own data, and the ability to automate up and down the stack is too disparate at the moment, and it's one of the things which it then pushes me more to look for strategies for non-telco vendor-driven software suites to make it as agnostic as possible. But with that comes consequences of access to features and all the rest of it. So it's a difficult challenge at the moment, and I think one of the things that to be overcome overall is an open understanding of trying to solve the problem rather than to necessarily protect individual IPs over actually problem solving.
And we're going to pick up on one of those points you just mentioned there a little bit later on before we end this session and go into that into a bit more detail. Any other comments from our guests about some of the challenges that are still out there and how we can overcome them? If not, Warren?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of levels to talk about this. And Neil brought up one about, we're always customer focused, of course, and driving new streams of revenue is always an important part of any business, of course. But I'm going to step back a little bit to the mundane automation of automating the current infrastructure and the current rollout of services and the current rollout of, what providers have to build a 5G network. They have to put cell towers in place. They have to put software at the bottom of those towers. So automating the processes that they have to do just to create this connected world that we're looking to do, to talk to that. As we move to 5G and next G, I'm not even going to call it 6G, the virtualization, if you will, of this entire environment, the pulling together of all these disparate pieces is a very complicated problem, and it's new. Right now, a single provider typically had come into these telcos and said, hey, I'm Ericsson, here's a solution, top to bottom. You can sit back and I'll make your network work. And frankly, that worked well, right? The SLAs are good. The quality of service has been good, but as we're looking to go to this virtualization model, obviously that no longer works, right? So the ability to manage, as you said, Ian, you need to be able to see what's happening at your network. You need to be able to see what's happening with, I might have 5 or 6 different COT servers that are running my RAN application. They all have different BIOS versions. They all have different network interfaces. Everything's different about the hardware. How do I pull all of that information into one place and have visibility into what's happening? These are kind of some of the challenges that we're running up against in the real world, in some of these current network rollouts. So putting operational pieces together that can automate that visibility, that can automate, I want to upgrade only the Dell servers that are running this BIOS version with this network cards, and having the ability to do something at that level, kind of, we configure AI and ML, but literally at that level to speak into reality, something like that, just to pick up a mic and say, I want to upgrade everything in New England that is at this, blah, 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 and then have it happen. That's kind of the challenge that we have to make a reality, and it's the mundane part of automation that frankly has to happen. It's not even a question really to me of OpEx savings. It's a question of OpEx, just operational considerations to make this network even possible, right? We have to get through this stage of being able to work together. Co-collaboration is a word I've heard a lot today, of being able to operate in an automated way, simply to operate the network. No single humans can do that anymore. So automation is an absolute necessity, not only to save money, but frankly to operate the networks in the future environments that we're creating.
I mean, we keep coming back to this question of why we're doing this, and if I look at the title of this session, the second part of the title of this session is how service providers can best operate at speed and scale. So, I think we heard about this earlier as well, but how we bring this back to service creation and delivery, and how we can speed up service creation and delivery. Because after all, this is what we're about, isn't it? We're serving these applications and services. Ian, any thoughts about how this all links in with that?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that we're driving at the moment is fixed wireless access. Right? For us, it's growing massively. It's a huge part of our network capacity already, and that's driven by the speed of 5G rollout. Then it's a matter of, how it's not just around sending a set of contractors out to go build the site and do the rest of it. It's the point of moment of activation. How do you automate as quickly as you can as you get kit on the ground, to then making customers know, or potential customers know, it's available to use. And it's how you get that window as small as possible. So, because the cost essentially starts the moment you get the kit on the ground. And from then onwards, it's to the point you then start making margin. So we've been looking at, what is all the touch points in amongst there? And say, actually, the quickly I do the activation part of it, the quicker I do my optimization, validation, doing communications out to the customers to know that it's there and starting to drive campaigns. So for us, it's actually been good to join the engineering activities up to the actual marketing team to say, take advantage of the capacity we've just created and the service we've made available, start using it. And then linking back, actually we were not taking advantage. This site is maybe only 20% active at the moment, so go harder, target more. And I think that's driven quite a lot to help drive the overall margin within the company, but it's the efficiency of our deployment, because we're not just sitting there with dead air. You know, we're trying to fill the capacity up and incentivize to try and fill the sites up as quickly as you can. Obviously not to the point where you have to spend more CapEx to deal with it, but that's the challenge, and that's how we've been approaching it.
Thanks, Ian. Ken, similar set of challenges?
Yeah, I tend to agree exactly what was said earlier. You can have a software package out of the box looking after that box, and you can look after 2 or 3 different things, but you can't scale that. So that software package is running this, but if the telemetry data is going into a data lake, it's something in an unstructured database, but we have some developers that can do something with that and put that into meaningful results, coming back to someone that can deal with that outcome, then you can scale that across markets. You can scale that across wireless or wireline or wherever the problem is. Once you have that, you automate that, then you can get to scale. If you're stuck with the box that just does this, then you're always going to be waiting for that alarm. Well, you can only go as fast as that he or she person can do.
Thanks, Ken. Alexander, you've heard from 2 operators here. What's your take from the other side of the fence on this?
2 things. One is automation is great. It's going to save us. It's the only thing that really can save us in the long run, I think. But that doesn't mean that we should shy away from the things that are at the bottom of the stack. And what really kills or slows down service creation and complicates the hell out of automation is variability. So fewer vendors, fewer variants on hardware pieces, fewer variants on processes, like kill the variables, and everything will become much, much easier. Because we live in an industry that is complicated enough already, and you try to introduce more components, more complexity, and not to drive complexity out with automation, then you're in trouble. So automate at the top and take variables out at the bottom, and we'll do better.
Right, interesting. Mark, I think you have something to say about
well, yeah,
this approach?
The balance is then supply chain variability, supply chain challenges, which we've all seen. And I think that then comes back to the choices you make in terms of your supply chain about can those vendors that you're working with work into your schema, work into your operational environment from an automation point of view, so that you can take out a lot of those variables, even though still having a diverse supply chain and a diverse direction there. I think that becomes a challenge, and it is the dichotomy. It is absolutely much easier to automate if you put it all in one. You know, it's clear boundaries or clear end to end, and you hand that over. And actually, you know, players like Rakuten have done a great job in bringing together multiple environments or multiple vendors into that to kind of create almost like a day menu or a menu of choices. You know that this works with this, with this, with this, and it's kind of a full integration stack that works. So that adds a little bit more variety of choice into the vendor community, but it's still not a la carte as an approach. And I think going to that full a la carte sort of approach really then is the compromise that you then have to make against being able to automate your processes. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Nastasi, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Mark said. The ecosystem still needs a lot of maturing. This particularly around the supply chain. I think the UK is a great example. You know, back from 2019, when the government looked at what a post-Huawei world could look like, and the need for this diversity. And then I'd probably just add that we mustn't underestimate the importance that government and regulators play when we're thinking about transferring data, ingesting data, because we need their support for things around TSA, are particularly important when we're looking at automation and customers' transfer of the data.
Thanks, Stasi. I think this is another good point to bring in our audience, if there's any audience questions. And I can see a hand over there. I think it's probably the only hand I can see at the moment. So let's go over there for a question. Can't see who it is.
Great. Hi, Andrew Coward at IBM. We've been talking about kind of reaching this nirvana state of automation. At IBM, we found if it's not done properly, automation can be kind of like pouring concrete. It's really flexible when you're pouring it, and then it becomes very brittle once it's set. And this challenge is really important because the flexibility, and you think about the agility, you've now got this paradox that the more you automate, the more rigid and inflexible your network can become. Because you're now managing these automation scripts as code, as a product. So one of the things to get right during this kind of automation process is to make sure you maintain the flexibility. So I'm kind of interested in the panel's view on how they're maintaining flexibility as they pour bits of concrete around their infrastructure.
Right. Thanks, Andrew. Some constructive construction comments from Andrew. Thank you. Ian?
We've actually done that ourselves, and I've been stuck with some pretty heavy-duty concrete in some pretty important applications. The lessons learned we've taken is very much, it's the whole point of, when I talk about the environment, it's just not about a technical box, it's also clear guidelines of what can be done and what can't be done. And what we've been trying to do is, it's back to people incentivization around driving flexible scripting approaches, being clear this is what we expect in terms of rules and guidelines to follow by, to try and make it a bit easier. And I think one of the things that we learned quite early on is if you don't have some repository of managing your end-to-end orchestration type activities, then you're exactly that, especially, again, the infamous TSAs will make security micro-segmentation an absolute nightmare if you don't have the right controls, the right end-to-end orchestration capability. So that's the types of things we've been looking at to try to make it a bit easier, but we have experienced that pain as well.
Thanks, Ian. Ken, you got any comments?
Yeah, I think not thinking of it as, okay, we're going to do this sprint and then we're done, right? There's an ecosystem. There's a wiki of knowledge of what it was. And I was saying earlier, software, the developers are part of the team. And that way you're not just pouring something and done. You know why you've done it.
Right, yeah, good points. And Mark?
You've hit on one of my major worries and nightmares, the things that keep me up, actually, is we're going through a development process, and it's continuous development. If you speak to anyone on my team, they'll tell you they are sick of hearing me talk about, does that take us down a cul-de-sac? Does that lead us into an area where we cannot get out of in the future? But then they'll turn around and say, well, what do you want to do in the future? And I'm like, well, I don't know. But I don't want to be blocked. I don't want to be driving down a one-way street. And that. So I don't know whether it's concrete we're pouring, whether it's putty, whether it's something, but you hit upon the worry that keeps me going. And I'm constantly asking my team that question.
I agree 100%. And that's such a great question, because the danger of automation, if we make it too specific, to your point as an ex-software engineer, I agree, the more you optimize, if we call automation optimization, the more specific your solution gets for what you've optimized for, if you're not careful. The danger of automation is if we do become too specific with our automation techniques, we need to change things, we end up having an automation over the automation, right, to fix what we screwed up in the first round of automation. So I think the key, and we're working through this with some of our partners, is to create automation that is declarative and outcome-based, not specifically automating for anything in particular, not going down a cul-de-sac, right? But to come up with declarative models that allow pluggability at the bottom and top of whatever you're putting into your automation technique, so that you can put new things in as new automation requirements become available or come to light as something you need to automate. Right? You have to have a platform that's easily extensible, that doesn't lock you into anything. So having declarative automation is really an important factor to think about when you enact your automation solution for your networks.
What you're describing is really difficult.
It's incredibly difficult. Yeah,
and one thing I think we need to embrace is we're going to fail. and then fail again. And there's nothing wrong with that. Iterations are great. Don't write the code once and expect it to live for 50 years. That's a nightmare. Iterate and then hire good software architects. I mean, the world has no shortage of people who really know how to architect complex big systems.
Right, and again, we're tying sessions a little. The agility discussions earlier, I think, are so prevalent here. That it's the same discussion, right? The fail fast, expect to fail. Failure is expected. So fail fast and understand what you did and move on to the next iteration. And fail fast again until you get to the right place. But it's fully expected that you're right. You're going to run into problems. This is incredibly difficult. You know, I guarantee the things we're doing today to automate, don't listen to me, Paul, if you're here, they're gonna be wrong. I mean, what we're putting together today is not gonna be the right end solution. But we need to make sure that it is at least directionally right enough that we don't have to throw everything away and we can start again and fail again and realize what we're doing and tweak and fix as we go. Kind of the agile mindset, right, top to bottom.
Because the danger of which is if you do go down that cul-de-sac, then you hit on the problem that you were trying to avoid in the first place, which was to be agile, to be able to respond to customer demand and speed and scale and be able to deliver the services that they want. If we're in the world where we say, we can do it technically, but we can't do it because of our processes, that's a really bad position to be in. Really, really bad position to be in. And we've seen that. We know that. It's something we've seen in the industry and we're trying to avoid.
Well, we don't want you kept up at night any longer, Mark.
Thank you.
We've got to fix this. We have to fix this.
I'm looking bad.
Stay up at night.
This is last chance for an audience question. If anyone's got another question from the floor, we can get it. Ooh, there's a hand over on the far left here. Let's go over here, please.
Thank you very much. Phil Shepherd, Clear Technology Consulting, X of 3, several people know. Just wanted to get the panel's opinion on automation. It appears to me it's sort of almost in layers. And automation has been around for quite a long time at certain levels. So if you think people in the radio space, automatic cell configuration, neighbor cell configuration has been around for quite a long time, and it dramatically improved the experience of radio networks and the performance of that, call drops, etc. But it was probably enabled by quite a high degree of standardization in terms of the concept wasn't changing, and a very stable and long-term sort of part of the network. But as you go up the layers, it becomes maybe less standardized, more flexible, a lot more variety as you get more software-based. I'm just wondered what the panel's view is on dealing with this automation question in those different layers and where we are in that stack of layers and what do you think about that concept?
Okay, great. Thanks for the question. Anybody want to have a stab at addressing the question?
I can try.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Well, I think the more, I would say, different domains are involved in automation, the harder it is. So automating within the RAN is easy for the RAN vendor and the SIs and the telco that is involved with that particular RAN. Automating something between customer care and the RAN, also including procurement and finance, that would be hard. So I guess to answer the question, all the way back to the top, why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it for OpEx gains, which we believe are necessary, and go after the big tickets first. And some of the biggest tickets are actually inside of a single domain. So let's go after that first. And a lot of our OpEx is in the RAN, so go after that first. Etc. That kind of thinking, and then save the really complex cross-domain automation ideas for the ones that really matter. And I don't think they're at the top of the list.
Thanks, Alexander. Mark?
I think it comes back to focus. What is the focus there? Great question, Phil. Thanks. But where you can get high gains in terms of that, like the example there, and it's not necessarily an easy win, but it's lower hanging fruit. Absolutely go after that. The question keeps revolving around as to why. why am I automating, or why am I doing what I'm doing? Not just automating, whatever the buzzword is of the panel that we're on. Why are we doing that? And it's keeping that focus into that. And it is a layered discussion for sure. As in our approach and in our focus, because we kind of sit in that wholesale sort of environment, then it's about how can we help our customers in their automation process as well. So we highly automate to allow them to be able to consume what they can of us, for example. And that's what keeps our focus in that. So I think it comes back to keeping that focus and not being diluted in that, because there are many things you could automate, but to what end?
Thanks, Mark.
I was just going to I agree with what Alexander said. I think if you focus domain by domain, I think it's manageable. So yes, you've got the RAN that's actually, it can be low risk because you can manage it by smaller volumes of sites. But an area where we've expanded into is then looking at transport around intelligent routing to be more efficient in how we do routing. So okay, we expanded to transport. And then, but get into the detail of core. I think it's very risky if you talk about core in its own element, or sorry, as its whole entity, but certain aspects within it around either basic service configuration, yes, you can do it. So I think we've been looking at doing it domain by domain. The utopia of an end-to-end use case for automation across all domains, I wouldn't go near it at the moment, because I don't think you'd achieve it to begin with. You'd overcook it and it wouldn't work. But domain by domain gets you probably the majority of the wins, and we've seen quite a lot of gains in that in the last couple of years as well.
Thanks, Ian. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, which is just enough time for one more question. I want to get this question in because, Ian, you brought this up earlier in one of your answers, and that is the importance of vendor-agnostic tool sets in driving automation. Why is that important to you?
So if we get, energy is obviously the hot topic, and it's energy-saving tools is the modern-day snake oil, and it's one that we all have to be clear of. But what I do see is if you've got a certain vendor, they will give you everything you need to make their product work very well. If you've got any other vendor in your environment, it won't work so well. So you've got to immediately accept you're going to get less benefits for another vendor if you're a multi-vendor environment, which most are. So, and that's just on energy, but it's the same in every other scenario. So it's around how do you actually get the right product in your environment to get an overall outcome, not just the one that suits that vendor of choice. So for me, it's a pain point in multiple levels, whether it's OSS, whether it's data and analytics, or whether it's in just actually managing the elements themselves. So it'd be good to get a general view around if this is a common problem, which I think it is, and how we'd approach it.
Right, well, let's find out. Ken, is this a pain point for you as well?
Well, absolutely. When you think of our business, we're putting hundreds of millions of pounds, again, into the underground in London, and you only get a return on that over multi-decade. And so to be locked into one specific vendor, you build that foundation. If you're locked into someone on top, look at what was the most popular company 15 years ago, who has a BlackBerry, right? I mean, if you get yourself stuck in one ecosystem, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And Mark, as our other operator representative on the panel here, issue for you as well?
Yeah, I completely agree with Ian on that. The way we've tried to tackle that is it is part of our vendor onboarding, it's part of our vendor selection criteria in terms of what are the automation tools that they have, and they're all developing them. What are the APIs? What can be extracted? What can be looked at? What can we harmonize across a multi-vendor strategy? And then how do we abstract that a little bit to try and get a maximum efficiency out of their data sources? Because it is all about then taking that data, putting it into or contextualizing that, putting it into meaningful or generating meaningful insights out of it. Otherwise, it's just a huge big data lake, which just becomes huge, and it's just massive to manage. And so you get no insight out of it. So it's about contextualizing that. So it becomes part of our vendor selection criteria. And we have not gone with particular vendors because we weren't impressed with how their strategy was for abstracting that data.
So, given it's an issue for the three of you, how do our three vendors respond to that? How do you work with the CSPs to help enable their outcomes? Warren, perhaps we can start with you and come around the panel.
Yeah, I'll take it all the way back to the pre-buy decision, right? Mm-hmm. The use of standards, the use of standards bodies, and interoperational standards that you're talking about. How do we make sure that the data we bring up is usable by you? Well, from our perspective as a CAS provider, we have to deal with a lot of different hardware vendors, right? So I want to be able to suck in that data from various pieces of hardware into a consistent formula to pass it to you in a consistent way, so that it doesn't matter what hardware vendor you choose, you're still getting the same information. So we're looking to work with multiple vendors with solutions that can be certified and established before the buy decision is made, so you can choose whatever hardware you want. And I will, as a CAS provider, we will give you the same usability, the same information, this abstracted data model, if you will. Of course, there'll be specifics, and that's more between me and my hardware vendor, how I make their hardware more efficient. But from your perspective, I think someone mentioned it here, we can't be too specific, it has to be declarative. So as long as we can pull that out using standards, so we can give you usable data, I think that's the way we approach it, that we're one piece in this platform, we're one piece in this solution, and we just want to be sure that as that piece, what we do best. But we understand we don't do everything the best, right? So I just want to expose what we do best to other people who can take advantage of the data that we can provide you.
Thanks, Warren. And Alexander?
I think on the one extreme, if you think about it this way, if you only had one vendor for your entire operation, that would have significant benefits. You're optimizing for something. What are you sub-optimizing for? Well, they would probably charge you an arm and a leg, which is we've seen happen, and that's why we shifted away from that. In this iteration, we may be shifting back someday. But on the other extreme, let's say you have 1,000 vendors or 10,000 vendors, it becomes unmanageable. The number of variables that I talked about before becomes too many. You can't operate like that. So there is a perfect balance, and maybe that balance point shifts over time depending on where we are in the different technology cycles. As a vendor, I really have no control over that. That's an industry thing. It's going to shift this way or that way. The only thing I can do is make my product as good as it can be, listen to the standards, implement good APIs, be a friendly vendor in terms of collaborating. But at the same time, the other thing that you're sub-optimizing for with multiple vendors is you'll get the least common denominator. You'll get the stupidest product out there. And that's just what you have to live with.
Yeah. Not good for anyone. Thanks very much. And Nastasia, we've got about 1 minute left, so I'm going to give you the final comment on how you can help CSPs with this conundrum.
Thank you. I think you want to be looking for a vendor who is going to support you at the beginning of this automation transformation journey that you're going on. Who's going to hold your hand, but then ultimately show you the path to being able to stand alone. You want to have a platform that has a single pane of glass so that the user experience is right. You want to be able to have the flexibility to develop your own apps and install your own apps, third-party apps, as well as having a library of predefined use cases and automation scripts that have been designed for the telco operator as well to give you the most amount of flexibility.
Brilliant. Great stuff. Well, thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. We're nearly at the end of the session. Lunch is awaiting. But before we do that, we are going to just take a quick look at the poll and just see what the current state of play is. That's the question we've been asking. Where should DSPs prioritize investments to achieve maximum efficiency gains? And we look at that fast track automation. Fast track it all. Top of the pile at the moment, or that probably will change as the day goes on, but also develop a cloud-native culture. And we will be talking about that tomorrow. So thanks very much for that. Let's show our appreciation for the panelists. Thank you all very much indeed.